Alright guys, so this is Sean again. I'm going to run you guys through creating an FK spline for a character. I'm using a character courtesy of Autodesk and their character creation tools, which works really great for my rigging class. But one tool I'm going to use, which we're going to start off using, is going to be the Orient Joint tool. Now this isn't the native Orient Joint tool in Maya, which really doesn't work that great. We're using the one on Creative Crash, and it's the Maya Orient Joint tool 1.10, and it should work just fine with Maya 2014. You have to sign in. If you can't find it, type it in here and download it. Now I've downloaded mine and I've stuck it in my scripts folder. Now this thing right here, if you're not familiar with it, is a script editor. If you want to get into rigging, this is very important that you get familiar with this guy. Understanding Python outside of Maya, it's just Python. But when you want to mess with Python and have it play with Maya nicely, you're going to have to learn little PyMel. And this boy is your best friend. I'm using the script editor to do so. And there's two different sections. There's strictly Mel and there's Python. So we're using a Python script. And this script allows us to make plugins as well as make external things that work a bit smoother than Mel, because Mel's a little bit chunky in the background, and Py works a little bit smoother because you can encapsulate commands and whole groups of information, which is pretty awesome. So what I did was I went in here and I did the file open, and I went to my Maya script. So basically what I did, I kind of cheated a little bit. I went and copied my script here, and when I went to open up my scripts, I went to my area that I wanted and I just pasted it in there. That's one way you can do that. Save a little bit of time. Once I selected it, I opened it. Once I opened it, it showed up in my viewer here, all ready to go. Now in the notes on this script, it tells you how to execute it. So you have to go all the way a little bit after the bottom here. And we're going to grab, excuse me, the Orient Joint window here. So this guy is going to allow us to start it. And you always, when you load any script, make sure that you do execute all, and make sure your cursor's at the very bottom, just to test it out to see if it's working. If you have an older version of Maya, the script may not work. I'm not sure what the notes say. But if you have a newer version like 2015, I don't know if it's going to work for 2015. Just make note of it. But you can test it out by hitting this, and you'll see if Maya gives you a warning of any kind. That only happens because new tools get made in Maya, and scripts won't always call upon the same object because they moved it when they updated things. Alright, so let me go and paste this in here. Control V and hit enter. And when I do, you'll see a new window show up. Now I'm going to leave this window open for a while because we're going to get back to him in just a second. What we're going to talk really quick though is about the theory of articulation when it comes to rigging. Now this, she could probably be modeled a little bit better. Like we could have a little bit of a better concentration between the elbows. The fingers could definitely be at least maybe have one or two more edges in between places of deformation. Hips are great. There's a little bit of fanning going on, which works good. We have the shoulders, which has got a little bit of the edge loops, and the fans going on, and you got edge loops going around the shoulder, which is really ideal. And also on the wrist, we definitely could have at least one more for better deformations at the wrist. So those are things to keep in mind, and you guys can add, those are my class, can add more edges if you want to. We may do that in class just to make your life a little bit easier. But those things are important to think and keep in mind. Even at the ankle, if we wanted to, we can make another edge loop here, another edge loop over here, mainly at the ankle, and that way when she bends her ankle, you can isolate some movement if you want to. Alright, so we got the scroll ready to go. Let's talk about that quick demonstration of articulation, which I did on my other video. This is really important to keep things in mind. This is about bone placement. Bone placement is very important. And if you don't place it in the right spot, you won't get the right look and feel for your object, for your model. Oh, it looks like my Wacom's acting a little weird, so I'm gonna wing this a little bit. We're gonna do this old school. So I'm going to hit OK here. We'll just do a new screen. And let me give you an example of how this works. So some of you guys have seen the older video. Should be good to go. The only thing on this one is I just updated it a little bit and emphasized a little bit more on the parent constraint, because a lot of you guys are noobs. And when you're new, you won't necessarily, let me do Control Z, you won't necessarily do things exactly ideally. So let me go ahead and I'm going to swap out my Wacom. One of these days, Wacom drivers will work normal the first time and not need 10 times, need to be reinstalled over and over. So I'm going to go and make a quick shoulder. There we go, just a little quick generic one. Armpit included, a little bit of muscle. And we'll do a hip, female hip. Boop, 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 boop. There we go. And we'll do just a regular kind of maybe a knee type of leg here. Control Z. Bad drawing. Mouse drawing. I am against mouse drawing. Unfortunately for this demo, I am forced to mouse draw. So, good edge loop. You really want to have good edge loops going around an area. Here, this works really well. And you can maybe even have another edge loop going around the arm, which you saw in the girl. That's a little bit wide. There, a little wide load. So we'll do one just a little bit more closer in. Not much more closer in, but. And then I would put our bone right here. Now this bone's going to allow us to have a nice accordion effect between the edges. And that is really important because you can get some nice flow. Those are the worst arrows ever, I know. Whatever. You get the point. And then we have another one here for the edge loops for the hip. So she can do like a karate kick if she wants to. And this allows us to get a nice little edge loop, and then you put the bone right here, right where the hip would be, and then she can articulate a little bit better. And the same thing with the knee. You want to have at least 3 edges between these areas, and this allows you to put the bone in between. So even the back, let's do a side view of the back. You want to make sure, wow, it's a big ghetto booty. Didn't mean to do that. Boop, boop, boop. Maybe because I'm Puerto Rican, it's natural. And then we go in here, and you can go in here and between every 3 edges, you'll put a bone. And put every 3 edges here. And just count them out. Know where your edge loops are. Now this all depends. 1 and then 1, 2, 3. You can put maybe 1 more here. And this all depends on whether the character is high poly or low poly. Keep that in mind. The lower poly it is, the less bones you'll need because there's just not enough edges to share. The higher poly it is, and how realistic you want the bones and the body to move, you would make more bones. Alright, so now that I covered that, let's get back to her because she's so sexy. So what we need to do now, let's go to the side view. Boop, boop, boop. And in the side view, we're going to start making her spine. Remember, we have to keep in mind all the different edges. Now, the Orient Joint Tool works really great. This guy allows us to check and make sure all of our spines are going in the right direction, or joints. Very important for that because it just allows you to really have a clean spine when you're moving. Now, when you make your bones, if we go into the options for bones, let's do that real quick because I don't want to throw you a curveball, and some of you guys have never messed with bones before. In here, our default, we have a degree of freedom. Now, you can lock that in ahead of time. Always keep it open because if I'm in the middle of making a rig, I want to make sure everything's set up correctly. Now, if you turn on scale compensate, sometimes what happens is your bones will get elephantitis. They'll get bigger, they'll get smaller. This doesn't always help it when you turn it off. Keep that in mind. You can auto joint limits if you want. We're not going to do that. Create IK. I don't like doing that unless I know exactly where my IK is at. I don't never really like, or I'm not very comfortable with my doing stuff for me. Alright, orient joint to the world. Now the only time you would turn this on, if when you're making a spine, you don't want your animator to necessarily do counter animation. Now I don't normally leave that on, but there are some demos you'll see some other animators do this. They'll tell you that you can turn this on to prevent any counter animation issues that might occur. Now we're not going to go into other details. In my older video I think I talk about the difference between 3D Studio Max and Maya and how turning on some of these properties, tweaking them out, can change things. But we're not going to worry about that so much. You see we have a secondary axis of X. We have a primary axis, of X, secondary axis of Y, and we have a secondary axis world orientation of Y. And if you want, you can change that to Z if you want to. The default is Y. And we'll go in here and we'll make our bones and hit enter. Now let's increase the size of our bones so you guys can all see that in TV land. So we're going to go to display, animation, and we're going to go to joint size. We're going to increase that just a tiny bit so we can see it. And if you go to your sub selection menu here, we can actually go here, right here where it says select by component, and we're going to go all the way to the question mark, and we can see the orientation of the joints. Now if I switch my view here and I rotate my camera around, you'll see we have relatively everything in the right orientation. Not too bad. If we go back to our joint tool, let's go back to the joint tool again. And we're going to turn this back to object mode. I'm going to go to the side view again, and this time with the joint tool active, we're going to set this back to Y. Now the problem that happens is sometimes when you keep that to Y, and I noticed this over the years, that, oops, I don't want to make an extension of that, so I'm just going to hit enter. You'll notice that sometimes your Z can get a little wonky. Now watch Maya not do it as it's done before. What a jerk. Let's see if it's going to completely be a jerk about it. Yeah, there you go. So you'll notice with me keeping those options that way with two Y's that Maya can get a little confused and ditch the Z in the opposite direction and the other half is in the opposite direction. That's kind of annoying. But if you ever come across that, maybe you've already made your bones. Maybe it's late at night and you've drunk way too much. You can use the Jam Soft Orient Joint tool. Now I made a little icon for mine just by simply grabbing my executable and putting it up there. But you can grab your joints, and this is way cool, and you can say Orient Joints according to my aim axis, which we have, and the up axis, which is Y, and say Orient Joint. And when we check it, we'll go back into our subcategory. You'll notice that it fixed some of them, but not all of them. Some are still kind of whacked out, right? Just a bit. So what makes this tool so great is that you can tweak this on a different level where we'll select this guy, and you can even tweak things out on like maybe a 15-degree angle. And we're going to make sure we get in object mode. And we can change his orientation if we needed to. So we'll go like this. Look at that. You can rotate that. It's so nice. And if you go and check it again, we'll go to our question mark, and we'll see in comparison to everything else that we just need to rotate maybe a little bit more. Just flip it completely. You can do that, and this is why I love this tool, because you can change your orientation, orient joints to objects even, orient joints as world axes if you want to, and you can control where the world up is at selected if you want, operate on selected. So I'll go in here and we'll go back to our object mode, and then we'll do the same thing again, go selected, orient joints. Okay, it looks like it's probably not going to fix them. It's like, screw you, Sean. I still don't understand. But that's okay. And that's one way you can fix it. If you do manually, another way, which I love, I can go in here and just keep my finger on the J key. This just depends how patient you are. And you can lock it in. And that's a quick way to orient these guys to the appropriate positioning that you want. Works out pretty well. Not too shabby. Alright, so I'll show you guys real quick that tool. I like it. Again, it's not perfect, but it is much better than Maya's default, in my opinion. Alright, so we'll just go back to object mode, delete this guy, and I just wanted to show you those properties in the joint tool, which allow you to be able to create your joint the way that you want. Let me close my outliner for a second, open up this guy up, and we'll close this guy for now. And I think that's it for now. Okay, cool. There we go. There's my properties right there, what I was talking about before. That's what I was trying to get up. What's happened when you run out of caffeine. Alright, so we got this guy here. Let's go and delete this spine. We don't need him. Bam! Gone. I forbid you to live. So what we're going to do is go to the side view real quick, and we are going to now make the joints according to our geo. And you always have to keep that in mind. Now in games, you'll notice sometimes when people make the root, they'll make the root at the orientation, and you can do that. This just helps to make sure you lock down exactly where your character is going to be in the world, and it is in level with its feet. Now we're going to do this according to animation, where we don't do that as much. We're going to just set this up in general. So we're going to do our first initial root bone is going to be here, right above where the hips are going to be at. I'm going to count about 3 edges. I'll go 1, and typically your spine's going to be maybe about 4, 5 bones total. Might be 6 depending on how realistic you want the spine to move. But remember, there's a lot you can do with less if you just strategically place things the way that you want. Now I'm going to go skip even another one here and go 2. We'll go 3. And won't even go to this one, I'll go to the next one here, because we have the sternum here, and things get a little bit non-bendy, and if it does bend, go see a doctor. We're going to go all the way up here to the top for the sternum area, and then we'll go to the top of the shoulders, and then we'll end at the base of the neck. All right, pretty good, not too bad. I probably can move up those the sternum probably a little bit higher, and to do so all I would need to do is grab the bone, and you can actually hit the insert button, which I didn't include in some of my other lectures, and you can move this without really affecting any of the hierarchy. It's kind of nice. One of my former interns showed me this. I did not know existed. It's pretty cool. Alright, so let's go over here, let's check where everything's placed at, and I could probably move this guy up maybe a little bit too, and hit insert to move him into place just a little bit there. And you'll notice we have a total of 1, 2, 3, and that's pretty much all we have. I mean, we could go 4 in this case, but we'll just keep it at 3 for now to keep the video a little bit shorter. 4's good, 5's good. I wouldn't go more than that. If you wanted to go more than that, it's because you're making a video for medical purposes and you really want to capture all the vertebrae, all the spine stuff. But really what we're getting here is the stomach bend here, some more stomach bending, so at least 2 here, basically for crunches. Then we have the break right where the sternum's at. So we got 3 bones. When these 3 should work pretty well with the lockdown root and should work good. So we have a total of 1, not counting the root, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we got about 5 and the base of the neck, which makes 6. Okay, so we're not including the neck in this particular exercise, but we will in other exercises, just because I want to keep it short, and it does take a long time to compile these videos. Alright, so we got this all set up. Let's go and make our spine controllers for this. So the other videos you'll see later on, I show you how to make your legs, and we'll talk about that. But let's go ahead and make sure everything's in place, and one way you can do that is do X-ray joints. And if you want, you can also click on your wireframe unshaded, and this will show you where everything's at in relation to each other. You can snap to vertices if you're not sure you put it in the middle or in the back end. Now you can put your spine, speaking of the middle, you can put your spine here if you want. That's fine. You don't have to put it back here like I have it. It literally could be right here, and that's totally acceptable. But what we're going to do now, with this spine set up and ready to go, we are now going to make the controllers for it. Now, FK spine is the most ideal. If I had $1 for every time other professors say, use the spline, the spline, spine, the spline. That is so old school. I learned that way back in the day. It's not efficient. It's not. You want to use FK spine because when your spine moves, it's pretty much FK. The only time you would use a spline or stick a stretchy IK spine in there is when it's more cartoony. But for realism, you really want to go FK and use the spline IK system for creatures, for quadrupeds. For bipeds, FK spine is money. It's the most ideal. Alright, so let's go and make our controllers. So I'm going to go to the curve control. Okay, so I'm going to go to the curve control here. And you can use any controller you want to use. I don't care. I'll even show you a quick way to make a controller. So we're going to go in here. I'll just make a quick circle, and we're done. I'm just kidding. No, we're not. We're going to hit the J key and rotate this guy at a 90-degree angle. And let's actually set this to 90. There we go. And we'll make another one. So we're just gonna actually use him for the first one. So keep our finger on the V key, snap it to the bone. If you're not sure or don't trust your snapping, double check in perspective. Go back to the side view, and we'll do Control D, duplicate. Keep a finger on the V key, and up to the next one. Control D, keep a finger on the V key, and up to the next one. And we don't really need to bend here, because when you do bend, it all starts to go into the neck. There's a little bit of bending, but remember the sternum, that's kind of important. And it doesn't really bend, and it shouldn't. It has the illusion of bending, but it really isn't, because it's a flat plate to protect your heart. Alright, so we got that there. We got all 3 controllers, and again, you can go to 4. Just depends where you place things. I actually could fit maybe one more bone in here, but I'm just going to keep it at 3. Keep it basic, 1, 2, and 3. And each one of these controllers, we need to name them. So to name them really quickly, there's a select by name, there's a rename, and a relative transform and absolute transform. We're going to go to rename, which is way cool, because we can all at once call this spine. And then when we hit enter, got to be able to type, because that's important, you're going to see all 3 spines selected there. Pretty sweet. And we're going to make sure we freeze them. So anytime you make a controller, you always want to go to modify, freeze, transform. Super important, because then your animator knows where it left off, where he left off. We're not its, we are people, you know. And they'll know exactly what to do from there. So what we need to do now is a thing called parent constraint. Parent constraint allows you to actually control the bone without disconnecting it. Because if we did hard parenting of that bone to that controller, you'll notice that that bone will disappear. Let me give you an example. Grab this guy here, shift select this, hit P. No longer is it in the hierarchy. That's not good for anyone. So what we need to do is do things a little bit differently. We want that controller to be in charge of the bone. So we're going to grab the controller first. And then we're going to shift select the bone. And then we're going to go to constraint. And we're going to go to parent constraint. And parent constraint, we're going to make sure it says maintain offset. They have it now where it's always on, which is good. And hit add. So we're going to do the same thing with the next one. We'll grab this here, shift select the bone, and we're going to hit the G key to repeat the last process. Grab this here, shift select the bone, and the G key to repeat the last process. Now unfortunately, if we start to move these, we'll notice that they're just isolated to particular areas. So like if I move this, that's all great, but if I go to the next one and try to move him, you'll notice he's only going to move the bone by itself. It's really just going to like rotate in place. So we need to make sure these bones are underneath each other all the way down the pipe. In my older videos, I grabbed the controllers and grabbed these and just hit P down the pipe, and you can do that, but you only do hard parenting when you know you're not going to add anything else or you're not going to make a mistake. Otherwise, we do the same thing we did before. We grab the parent first, then the child. It is backwards when it comes to parent constraint. Just keep that in mind. So we're going to go here and do parent constraint. And we're going to grab the parent first, then the child, and hit the G key. So now, you'll notice when we move the spine, the whole thing moves. Pretty slick. Java's wanting to interrupt my lecture because he's a jerk. And then we have this here. Pretty sweet. Look at that. Pretty cool. All under the same system, which is really nice. And make sure you name your bones too, so you can grab shift select all the bones all at one time, and then you can handle things pretty well from there. Let me see if I messed up my orientations on my joints. I kind of did. My bad for that. And let me go back and undo a little bit to fix them. And click on this guy and see if I messed up my joints. Oh, dagnabbit, I did. That's okay. So we'll go in and fix that real quick. We can use the Orient Joint tool. We're going to show off with it again. Custom. Open this up. And, oh, it failed to open. Why? Because I love you. You're so awesome. Why you do this? So we're going to go ahead and paste this back in here again. Control V. And hit enter. Ba-da-da. So let's go ahead and orient this guy accordingly. Orient joints. Oh, I got to make sure I get rid of my parent constraint first. And let's check it. Yep, there we go, all parent constraint. So anytime you make a mistake, this is my example too of why hard parenting can be tricky. If I messed up and these were hard parented, I wouldn't be able to go back. But if I hit Control D, watch this, it's a miracle. Go in and move this back. New controllers. New controllers that can refreeze and snap them into place. Old controllers I can get rid of. No longer restricted. Grab this guy here and orient these joints. I just fixed them like a champ. So you guys get the idea of how this works. Pretty sweet. There you see the Orient joint shining. Wasn't doing so great before, but now he's like the superhero. And you get the idea how this works. Sound good? That's about it for the video. Hope you enjoyed it. This is the updated version, a little bit faster. Try to get it done. Alright, cool.